Hi, friends. This is a recording of Hiawatha and the Peacemaker. I'm not starting at the beginning because you did hear me read some of the pages this morning. I should say this afternoon. So, what I'm going to do is just continue from where we left off. And as a review, just to let you know, we left off, if you remember, that Hiawatha, the Peacemaker, and the chief of the Cayuga Nation, the Cayuga chief, were paddling over and they said, as one nation. Remember, Hiawatha is the one that is narrating or telling the story. The peacemaker is the one that is saying, we all need to stop fighting each other and come together as one and make sure we use peace. So let's see what happens next. We were met by 15 armed braves. For the first time, the peacemaker showed signs of worry. We were surrounded by warriors and led to the center of the Seneca village. The Seneca chief approached the circle, and the guards closed in on us. With a wave of his hand, the warriors lifted their spears. But then he nodded, and the guards drove their spears deep into the dirt. The Seneca chief sat down and told us that the wind had carried our message from the land of the Cayuga. The Seneca people wanted to learn about the peacemaker and the great law. And I'm going to pause right there just so we can kind of revisit what the great law was. If you remember, right over here, it says in this paragraph, peace, power, and righteousness shall be the new way. We must join together. All nations will become one family. Our people shall have one body, one mind, and one heart. This is the message of the great law. So that was the great law. Let's see what happens. So the Seneca chief wanted to know about the great law. We will all perish. That means we will all die if we continue this violence. A change must come, and the time is now. Alone we will be broken. I said, but together we are more powerful than the greatest warrior. The Seneca chief trailed us in his canoe. Okay, and you can see that now he has joined too. Sorry, one second. Guided by the moon, we trekked through the forest to the land of the Oneida people. We were halfway to the camp when the snap of a stick was heard through the trees. Suddenly, the earth beneath our feet gave way. We hit the ground and were then engulfed by a giant net. So there they are walking, and a giant net comes and covers them up. The Oneida chief stood towering over us. I've spared your life, he declared. Why would two chiefs and two strangers be so foolish as to enter our territory in darkness? His men dragged us through the dirt and bound our hands. That means tied our hands. The peacemaker explained that we had joined the Cayuga and the Seneca nations in the name of peace. But his words had no power with the Oneida. Then the peacemaker turned to me and said, Tell your story, Hiawatha. Tell us of your great loss. I spoke of my pain and of my hatred for Tadadaho. I told the Oneida that my wife and 3 daughters had been killed by the violent world we had created. But as I spoke, I felt something come over me. Forgiveness. I had not been able to save my family, but on this journey, I had been able to forgive myself. I began to understand the meaning of the great law, and I turned to the peacemaker and I placed my fist over my heart with a knowing nod. He smiled. A warrior approached and he untied all of us one by one. Rather than feel the anger that had consumed me, I now remembered the joy of my family. I was joined by the Cayuga chief, the Seneca chief, the peacemaker, and lastly, the Oneida chief. Together, We traveled as 3 nations. And you can see down over here in the pictures, every time there's a chief or a nation that joins, you'll see that in the canoe. So far we have the Mohawk nation from the Hiawatha nation, Hiawatha's nation. We have the Cayuga, the Seneca, the Oneida. They're all traveling together. The time had come to return to the Mohawk people with proof of our message. When we arrived, they were impressed to see the 3 chiefs with us. The clan mothers had a glowing look of approval. But the Mohawk chief told us that word of our mission had traveled to Tadadaho. His evil is too great, he said. Your message will only bring harm to our people. Angered by his lack of faith, the Oneida chief pressed the sharpened tip of his staff under the chin of the Mohawk chief. And you can see that right over here. We no longer use violence, said the peacemaker as he reached out and lowered the staff from under the chief's chin. The peacemaker led us to the tallest oak and towered over the Mohawk River. I will climb this tree, he said, and your men shall cut it down. But I will not perish. The river will catch my body and carry it to safety. Then you will know that my words are true. So the peacemaker is trying to prove that peace is really the way, that you need to see that violence is not going to help. Let's see what happens. Okay, you can see the top of the tree right over here. There's a peacemaker, and he said, if you chop the tree down, it's going to fall into the river. And I am going to be saved. And that will prove to you that this is all true. We need peace. The men chopped down the massive tree. It crashed into the icy waters, and the peacemaker vanished. I stood silent, stunned by this foolish stunt. I feared the peacemaker had sacrificed himself at a critical point in our journey. Wonder what happened to the peacemaker. An elder clan mother approached the circle of the chiefs with 4 younger women by her side. This man has come with a message of peace and unity, but you greet him with closed ears and closed minds, she said. You reject Tadadaho, but you behave just like him. She looked at me, and I could feel her sympathy for the death of my daughters. A tear ran down her cheek. Let us hope the peacemaker is alive, she said. While you sharpen your weapons, I will pray for a miracle. The Mohawk chief was transformed by her words and nodded. The other women stepped into console her, and we all quietly walked back to the camp. They're wondering what happened to the peacemaker, and saying we shouldn't be behaving like Tadadaho. That's the message the lady was giving. I'm going to pause right here and ask you, if you haven't done so already, just jot a few notes down. Like, what do you think? What words are describing Hiawatha and the peacemaker? We haven't met Tadadaho yet, but we know some things about him. You can pause the video too. Write down some notes. What are some describing words? What are they feeling? How are they behaving? Okay. When we rose in the morning, smoke from the river's edge caught our attention. We hurried down to find the peacemaker sitting by a fire, patiently waiting for us. The elder clan mother draped a blanket across his shoulders, and relief spread among us. They were relieved. They're like, thank goodness he's alive. Filled with emotion, the Mohawk chief agreed to follow us in his canoe to the land of the Onondaga to confront Chief Tadadaho. Together, we paddled as 4 nations. You can see that down over here. The wicked Tadadaho lives separately from his people. You can see this is him. It's kind of scary looking, right? Bands of warriors stood guard day and night. When we arrived, they yelled and pushed us away. The peacemaker kept his hands by his side to discourage violence, but the chiefs and I pushed back. A figure appeared in the doorway of the dwelling, hunched over, withered and twisted. Tadadaho was a horrifying sight. Sickness from the evil within had taken over his body. Scales covered much of his skin, and snakes slithered through his hair and onto his shoulders. No words came from his mouth. Instead, a forked tongue produced a thick hissing sound. And you can see his tongue right there. So when he's talking, he's hissing his words. My anger returned and I wanted to destroy Tadadaho. The chiefs continued to push against the warriors. The fighting grew until something unexpected happened. A soft, haunting melody of purity and truth came floating through the air. Spellbound, all lowered their weapons. The hymn was coming from the lips of the peacemaker. His melody had stopped the fighting. As the song drifted through the air, the moon crossed in front of the sun, darkening the blue sky. This miracle stunned the warriors, and they pulled back in fear. But the rest of us were enchanted by the glory of the hymn, and we joined in singing. So you can see the peacemakers singing this melody, this song, this hymn, and everybody's lowering their weapons. Tadadaho cursed the sky, waving his scepter, and showing no sign of fear. As the peacemaker finished his singing, the moon passed, revealing the sun again, more beautiful than before. The peacemaker asked me to make medicine for Tadadaho's sickness. He said that where there is darkness, we must bring light, and that it is by forgiving that we are set free. So he's saying, even though Tadadaho's not such a nice person and is evil, we need to help him by being kind to him, by bringing light to him, by forgiving him. I gathered roots and herbs for the medicine, but how could I help a man who had brought me so much misery? How could I forgive him? Yet, I put my heart and soul into the potion, and with this action, my anger disappeared. I entered the hut with the medicine paste and fresh water. I explained that every day, some of the paste must be mixed with the water and drunk. Tadadaho grabbed the medicine from my hand and drank. His strained breathing eased. The evil look in his eyes softened. He appeared to wonder why a man to whom he'd brought so much pain would help to heal him. And you can see here Tadadaho taking the medicine from Hiawatha. The peacemaker told Tadadaho that we would return in 3 days and to continue taking the medicine. We traveled back to the people of the Cayuga, Mohawk, Seneca, and Oneida, and told them of our encounter. On the 3rd day, a mass of people followed us to the land of the Onondaga to see Chief Tadadaho once again. Tadadaho's voice had returned, but he was still hunched over and sickly. The peacemaker approached him and, with all the tribes watching, placed his hands above his head and chanted. Tadadaho let out a scream, and the snakes slithered from his hair into the grass where they belonged. You can see over here, all the snakes that were part of him, they're all escaping and running away now. Okay, the peacemaker is doing some form of magic to make it go away. Everyone followed the peacemaker to a tall white pine. He placed his hand on my back, and once again I spoke for him. People of all nations must now come together as one. Beneath this tree, we shall bury all our weapons of war. This will symbolize the end to our fighting. And the men uprooted the white pine and threw their weapons into the hole. Now we will replant this tree, and it should be called the Tree of Peace. So you can see the white pine tree being taken out and all the weapons being thrown in that hole. As I looked at Tadodaho, the scales on his skin began to disappear. The peacemaker placed his fist over his heart, and again I spoke. As 5 nations, we will bring forth peace, power, and righteousness. The women of our tribes shall appoint the chiefs, and as one people, we shall live under the protection of the great law. All voices will be heard as we now vote before action is taken. So they were going to vote, and the women were the ones that decided who the chiefs were going to be. I looked at Tadodaho, and the once crooked man now stood upright. Look at this picture of Tadodaho. Look at him in this picture, and look at him back when we first met him. Do you remember? Look at him here. So by taking the medicine, and by thinking peaceful thoughts, and with the magic of the peacemaker, he was able to free himself from all that darkness and all that evil. Atop this great white pine shall live an eagle that will look over all 5 nations. And that eagle shall be you, Tadodaho. You will be the great keeper of peace and the protector of all the people. So friends, you see that eagle at the top? That's supposed to represent Tadodaho, someone that's going to look over all the nations. The men and the women of the Mohawk Nation began to stomp their feet in unison. Clapping came from the Cayuga. A chant formed between the Onondaga and Oneida, and the Seneca pounded drums. The rhythm grew louder in perfect time, and the melody soared through the pines. I looked over to Tadodaho, but he was gone. A beautiful scream echoed through the woodlands. And as 5 nations, we looked up to see an eagle perched atop the tree of peace. So Tadodaho had changed into this eagle. Now it says 5 nations because if you remember, I shared with you that in 1142 is when the Confederacy, the 5 nations came together. And Tuscarora didn't come till much later in 1742. So much later, okay? And that, my friends, is a story of how the nations that we were looking at how these nations, remember we were looking at this? How these 5 nations came together, the 5 tribes, Tuscarora at the end. And see this picture right here? That picture of the tree in the middle is that great white pine tree, the tree of peace. And the eagle would be sitting right at the top. So there is another image for that represents the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois, that has an eagle perched at the top. That was Tadodaho. What a great story, a story of how those nations came to be known as the Iroquois Confederacy. So friends, I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you got some notes written down about each character and what they were like. And what we're going to do when we come back is we're going to take a look at your notes, what you wrote for each character. And then we're going to decide, did they stay that way? Did Hiawatha stay angry the entire time? Did the Tadodaho stay evil the entire time? Did the great peacemaker stay nervous the entire time? We're going to look at those and see how they changed and why they changed, okay? Thank you so much for listening. This was a long story, so thank you so much, okay? All right, see you later. Bye-bye.